Well, good morning. I'm Ken Biberai, and welcome to Coffee with Ken, a thought leadership series at the nexus of business and politics. We are here in person in Washington, D.C. A special thanks to FTI Consulting for hosting today's conversation. We are going to be talking about innovations in the blockchain. Excited to welcome former Congressman Tim Ryan, former Congressman and President for the Club for Growth, David McIntosh, for being here. Before we even get started, guys, how did you two get together to team up to talk about the blockchain? I mean, there's got to be a story here.
Yeah, there's a great story. I became passionate about it a couple of years ago, going down to the Bitcoin conference in Miami. And a friend of mine at that time, who's has a Democrat super PAC, went and we connected up. As we started thinking about this issue, everybody there said, can't this just be bipartisan? And one of the candidates we supported was from Ohio, a guy named Josh Mandel. And he said, Tim Ryan, who almost beat the guy that beat me, is really good on these issues. I want to introduce you. And another mutual friend, Greg Schultz, came into it. And we realized we're both from the Midwest. We like each other. We've got a lot of common sense. We are on different sides of the aisle. But there are a lot of things we can agree on. And more importantly, we can go out and have a Manhattan afterwards and tell stories.
Or before.
That's right. So he's become a really good friend.
That's amazing. And Tim, how did you get into it?
I got the call from Greg, and who I've known from Ohio politics for a very long time.
Oh, he's from Ohio?
Yeah.
Greg's from Ohio.
This whole
anybody
group is
worthwhile.
Ohio. They kind of accept me from Indiana.
We take Big Ten states. We keep it limited. But I worked with Patrick McHenry. There was a glitch in the infrastructure bill on some of the funding for it. And so Patrick's an old friend too, from Congress, Republican from North Carolina. He was looking for a partner to help on the Dem side. So him and I did that. So that was kind of like my last year or two in Congress. And then when I got out, obviously this kind of fell together. So, and I think just generally speaking, I think, we all get in our partisan corners and we have our beliefs and all that. But I think, guys like David, guys like me, we're kind of looking for something.
Yeah.
Can we just agree we can't hate each other all the time, right? And so I think part of it is it's just very refreshing to, we do calls every week, and it's and David and I and, a couple of our partners. And it's just kind of a refreshing kind of place to be.
Well, look, we're here to talk blockchain, but you can't really talk blockchain without talking a little bit about crypto. It's been a pretty volatile couple of years, but since announcing this talk, Bitcoin's going up from $40,000 to 70, probably because of this and nothing to do with the SEC or anything like that, right? But we
move markets.
Yeah.
So talk about this moment, right? There's down periods, skepticism. We're going to talk a lot about trust today, but today, how's the environment and climate feel based on kind of the rapid
No, that's a great question, Ken.
Bitcoin.
And first, we have to step back and acknowledge new technology, new financial products. Bitcoin's more like a commodity. They're inherently more volatile, right? And so it's been around since the early 2000s, and a lot of volatility. Although if you plot it over a longer chart, there's a steady rise. It got up to about 60, and then it came back down when the markets came down. All of that made the more traditional regulators a little fearful of it. And then you had Sam Bankman-Fried, right? Came around and said, this is great, join my platform, you'll make tons of money. And it turned out it was a big Ponzi scheme and a fraud. That took the regulators who were sympathetic to him and probably got scammed, so they didn't oversee him sufficiently. And then pendulum swung the other way to overregulation. And I think it's now swinging back to a more stable, let's look at this. I saw some latest statements from folks in the Biden administration that maybe indicated we're not enemies of crypto.
Yeah.
And then the Gensler decision to approve the ETFs for Bitcoin, that's what shot it up, right? But that's a signal, there's legitimacy here. And for Bitcoin, we're most comfortable there. And I think the other types of crypto, they're based on a different proof of stake rather than proof of work. But I think they'll be able to come into the marketplace with sufficient regulation so people are comfortable, but not over regulation.
Interesting.
We talk a lot about the parallels with the internet.
Yeah.
You have a transformational technology coming, and there's going to be a lot of bumps in the road, a lot of ups and a lot of downs, like we had when the internet was kind of unfolding. And so, but you have to, and this is the argument we try to continue to make, America should be leading this. There's going to be ups, there's going to be downs. Nothing worthwhile is easy in life, generally speaking, let alone a technological breakthrough. So we think that the idea of comparing this for people to easily digest and say, well, we're not going to get rid of the internet. That would have been a really dumb thing to do. And this is going to have as transformational, if not maybe more, in the coming decades.
And so much of it is probably about explaining other applications of the blockchain. So maybe talk a little bit about that. Like, how else would you kind of have the conversation without it just being about crypto or Bitcoin?
Yeah, so it's fascinating. Like the internet, and Tim's right, it's very similar. There's lots of different applications, right? There are companies out there that are using blockchain technology, not as a security or commodity, but to put, one of them, a guy started a company to put car titles on it. And so it's a more efficient way of doing that. I think it's going to create a lot of innovation and savings. I ran into one guy who was going to use Bitcoin to do electronic fund transfers. And he pointed out there are $1 trillion of fees every year to transfer money around the globe, and that he thinks he can do that on pennies on the dollar and drive down that cost by using the blockchain technology.
So it's, fintech, there's a lot of these other areas. We did a call with the Resi. You ever make reservations in major towns? That has a blockchain application to it. So it's behind the scenes on a lot of things that we don't really know. But as a Democrat, if I may, sitting on the left here, we have to have a posture of, we need to make government work, right? Government needs reform. So our friends would say less government, much less government. And I would say, well, we need government, but it got to work. I think this technology is applicable. I mean, you look at AARP says there's almost like $9 billion in scams to seniors, right? This could help with that. You look at how the government runs, it's very inefficient. I mean, they're not always wrong, the other side when they're criticizing it. So why wouldn't we take the technology, take the blockchain, take the innovations and say, we could actually make this run a lot better? Banking fees, stuff David mentioned. That should not be a left-right issue, Democrat-Republican issue. So we should be able to agree on that. And if we embrace the technology and push the reforms, we can make the government work. It would be a modern government, right? This government was built in another time for another age, but stuff has moved. And this can help us, I think, make things run a lot better.
And one of the things Tim brought up, if we don't do that here in the United States, it's going to happen overseas. I hear a lot of people tell me they're going to Dubai to invest or look at projects, or London now has a more favorable environment. And it would be a shame if, like Tim's predicting, the government agencies realize, okay, we got to use this technology, but they have to go buy it from some company overseas, right? Because America gets left in the dust. We both agree that's got to be a top priority. We need it to be very competitive here in this country. So like the internet, where we were the leaders, we're dominant now. We can also do that on the blockchain.
And not only working family impact, financial services, but potential national security kind of implications if we kind of lose this race, or?
Yes, there are. That's an interesting debate, Ken, because the opponents of private blockchain innovation are using the claim that, hey, you can use Bitcoin to fund terrorism. And the reality, or Jeremy, who you mentioned earlier, in their group, and a couple of other folks who specialize in this area have told us, no, reality is we can track down the terrorists better if they use Bitcoin than if they use the old cash method in a bank that's corrupt. And so one of the missions Tim and I have is to educate our former colleagues up on the Hill. Here's the reality. Don't be fooled by Elizabeth Warren. She's That's a canard that she's using to try to stop the whole technology.
And that's what I think kind of the power of just David and I being together. You know, like it's like, what are these two doing?
Yeah.
And it's like, well, we're living in reality.
Yeah.
And we want you to live in reality too. And so you have these conversations. And today in the, you know, super toxic, hyper polarized political culture, really, that we're in, if somebody says, oh, they're financing terrorism through this, then it just kaboom, right? Everything's like as fact.
Yeah.
And so we are, you know, kind of the turtles, you know, in the race of like, no, slow and steady. That's not it. Listen to Jeremy.
Yeah.
Listen to this person who has NSA experience, FBI experience, CIA experience, that are living in this world and telling us about these ledgers that can track everything. And opposed to, you know, sacks of cash, which is the reality of it. So if we can get people to actually live in reality, you know, and some issues are national security issues and should not be politicized, but everything's politicized now. But something like this, like we could leapfrog countries. It's going to be great for our economy. Could be great for reforming government. It's like a win across the board.
Interesting. So it is a bit of a political time. Ambassador Haley dropped out of the Republican race yesterday. It looks like we have a 2020 repeat. How are you seeing 2024 play out in terms of getting attention for some of these issues over blockchain?
Well, that's a great question. Right now, and we do a lot of polling in my group, the top three issues are the border, no, the border, the economy, safety, education. And so questions about, if you ask them questions about crypto, that word, by the way, has a negative connotation after Sam's whole fraud. If you ask them about Bitcoin, they say, I don't understand it. So that at the top level, I don't think it's going to be a big issue that gets debated. But I think it will be one sort of targeted to special audiences that care about it. And I'll let Tim describe, because from my angle, it looks like an opportunity Republicans have because the Biden administration has been so negative towards it. My hope is they look at that and say, well, we don't want to, it doesn't really help us that much. We like it. They're going to move our way. But it'll be a sub issue that hopefully he and I can convince people, let's move this forward as something good for the country.
And it sounds like President Trump in recent weeks has kind of actually started being a little bit more open to Bitcoin, and he's had a lot of success with NFTs, right? I mean, he's
classic Trump style, right? Vivek told me that I should be against the central bank digital coin. I'm against the central bank digital coin. And thank goodness Vivek's telling him that, right? Which, by the way, I want to reflect on one thing that issue, which does percolate up a little bit more, at least on the Republican side, as an issue they talk about publicly. I think the real divide is not partisan. It's not Democrat and Republican. The real divide is, should this technology and the products from it be developed and controlled by the government, or should it be developed and controlled by the private sector, innovators, individuals, with government regulation to prevent fraud and protect consumers, protect producers? That divide is huge. And I've mentioned Elizabeth Warren a couple of times. It's really clear to me her agenda, because she's very pro central bank digital coin, very anti private sector coin, that she's on the opposite side from us. And she's trying to get allies up there on the Senate. So we're hoping, or at least my hope is, we get to reframe this as that's the question: role of government, role of the private sector, and not Democrat, Republican, who's going to use this politically.
Yeah, I think, David said, with some regulation, put the guardrails up and let's roll. That's kind of how America became America. And we would argue in between the lines of more or less on probably all of these regulatory issues, but that's a conversation that we should have. And I think from a Democratic perspective, I mean, myself and Greg and others were really trying to work with Democrats. It's there's this central bank versus kind of private sector thing. The other divide is generational.
Yeah.
We see there's not many guys with this level of white hair.
I mean,
that
this is amazing.
distinguish this
It's
could be. I
amazing.
mean, I hope I look like that. But like it is a generational thing. But there are younger, newer members of Congress. You talk to guys like Hakeem Jeffries,
Sure.
like they're very open to this. Coming out of New York, being a generational kind of candidate or leader, there's a lot more receptivity to the arguments that we're making, and we have to continue to plow that ground. And again, someone like Elizabeth Warren says no, then Democrats are like, wait a minute, what's wrong with this thing? And we're just trying to work through it. And again, I think when you talk to young people, and 60% of crypto is owned by people of color. So this is not like an elite white thing. This is broadly used across, and I think the more we learn about these technologies, the economy's shifting in so many different ways. And I come from a place, industrial Midwest, and David remembers there used to be factories there. The auto plant, General Motors, used to have 16,000 workers. Well, we don't have 16,000 workers anymore. We're lucky if you get a 1,500 battery plant. So the future of the economy is going to be very much about entrepreneurship, small, mid-sized businesses, and we want to make sure that they're super competitive, and that this technology can help them do that. Not paying these fees, being more transparent, being more efficient and effective. So we're trying to get Democrats to say, "Hey, Al Gore invented the internet." We all know that, right, David? So he said. So why wouldn't we embrace at least the next generation?
Yeah. So talk about DC, right? Like, do you prefer just like the
He hasn't moved
mechanics?
back here. He's been smart. Stayed in the Midwest.
But just the mechanics of regulation, right? Is it the SEC you prefer? Is it in the Senate? Is it in the House? The epitome of efficiency and governance, right? I mean, what does this landscape of regulation look like? Like, isn't it like careful what you ask for a bit? I mean,
it is careful because, and I've had a long career of experience working in the regulatory fields. You get capture if you're not careful in a regulatory agency, in which case they put their thumb on the scale for some competitors, but not others. You've got Congress that doesn't yet understand this technology. I think the best way to approach it in general would be, let's look at our existing framework. It's worked really well for securities, for commodities, for things that are similar to blockchain products, and start applying those principles. They've worked for us in our country. We, like Tim said, we can argue whether it's a little too much or a little too lax, but rather than create a whole new structure. And Congress right now is wrestling between SEC and CTFC, sorry for all the alphabets, but basically the securities or the commodities regulator, partially because of the outcomes, right? They expected different ones. My way of looking at it is that's not the best way to do it. Don't try to win a particular outcome and then create a structure that doesn't work. So my hope is, like we did with biotech, actually, we said we don't need a new biotech agency. We've got the food approval process, we've got the drug approval process. Let's enhance those to deal with this new technology. That's not a real fancy, we get to go win elections approach, but hopefully after the election we can get kind of a consensus developing on that.
Interesting.
I mean, I think David did it.
And so it's probably a post 2024 election to really see regulatory guidance and something.
I don't think anyone's going to win or lose an election in November on a cryptocurrency or blockchain.
So we'll continue in this kind of state as it is now, right? With how things are evolving. And
we might see a few things pop out.
But you're not expecting.
But not expecting. Let me share with you a story. I want to brag on Tim and my colleagues on the Democrat side of this. The only piece of legislation that's actually passed either in the Senate or the House was a rider that our group helped promote, And I worked with Tom Emmer,
Mhm.
who said, yeah, that makes sense. I'll introduce that. And being in the majority, he got the privilege to do it. But Tim and his team worked with particularly Richie Torres, but the Democrats on the committee that were favorable towards blockchain innovation. And it was so funny. We were comparing notes, and I would talk to Emmer. He said, okay, I'm not sure we have the votes. I think the Democrats will be against it. And I got some Republicans I'm a little worried about. And I told him, no, my colleagues have been talking. You've got some supporters on the Democrat side. Why don't you meet with them? Tim and his team were telling Richie, why don't you meet with Emmer? You know, you guys are aligned. And the staff, well, I'm not 100% sure of this, but my hunch is the staff both said, oh, we don't want to do that.
Having had staff.
And so they called up Richie and said, hey, Tom's going to be on the floor right before this vote. You guys agree with each other. Go see him. And we told Emmer the same thing. And they did. And they agreed, okay, the best way to get this through is a voice vote. Can we all agree on that? And it passed.
Great.
And it's because they were able to reach some of on the Democrat side, everybody overcame partisanship for a moment, and the bill got through. Now it got stuck because it's in one of the appropriations bills that didn't make it all the way through. But it's an example of how if you focus on the result, you don't care who gets credit, and you go get the job done, that we can do it. I'm kind of proud that our group is the only group that's ever gotten something through.
It's a glimmer of hope.
Exactly.
Well, a lot of it's on our side is providing cover.
Sure.
You know, I mean, no one likes to be the first mover in politics. And so if we can say, well, you know, Tim Ryan's doing this, and he was a pretty normal guy, you know, from Ohio, who's like looks at things pretty, you know, clearly. Maybe it's not so bad. And then, you know, you get a Richie and you get some of, you know, Wiley and some of these other guys, all of a sudden now everyone has permission to do what they, I think in their heart and in their mind knows right.
So we're talking a lot about educating DC and policymakers. Talk a little bit about the private markets and banks and the private sector. I mean, are you seeing adoption? Do you spend time dealing with financial institutions in a more traditional sense
with those guys?
I'm doing some work with Coinbase, and they've been, you know, phenomenal as far as trying to drive the market and really educate people. And we get back to politics a little bit. They've got a whole stand up for crypto piece of their you know, kind of political arm, and I think they've got 300,000 or 400,000 people around the country already that are, you know, ready to lobby and advocate, and go to DC or go to state capitals or whatever. So that's a little more of the political. I'm stunned. Like, I'm still learning a ton about this, you know, as I'm sure that David is too, and he's been doing it a lot longer than I have. The amount of applications for the blockchain, it's just mind-boggling. You know, you can go through, you just Google it and get a list, and it's like all these different applications for it. And to me, that's the most exciting part. And I think you talk about, you know, the fees, banking fee, like this is going to be a major freaking disruptor. And I think, you know, you look at the fees that people pay, it drives them nuts, whether it's credit card fees or transfer fees or bank fees. You know, they're hidden everywhere you try to go. And I think that's why you're seeing so many businesses pop up, because they're like, I can make a little bit off of this, and I'm going to save people a lot of money. And so watching that kind of emerge to me is really, really exciting. And then what I would like to see in places like Ohio, where we have, like, Columbus is really crushing it. Like, it's one of the most dynamic areas in the whole world as far as development, chip manufacturing, football, you know, lots of economic activity around healthcare and all that. But then you have these other areas of the state, you know, the Youngstowns and Steubenvilles and Toledos. I think part of what we've got to figure out is, how do we not, and I don't want like government saying, go there. How do we just create an environment where, you know, East Liverpool, Ohio can benefit from maybe a mining, you know, facility or two or three, or down the Ohio River, these forgotten communities. And that's why it's kind of disappointing that people poo-poo this, because they don't see. And we have a mining facility in Coshocton, Ohio, built by Union labor.
Interesting.
So how do you get union guys to build this stuff? So to me, that's the opportunity that's out there in the private sector.
I do think there will be some of the old industry, maybe in the banking sector and other places, that view this as a threat because it is a disruptor.
I mean, these are powerful forces, right? I mean, you're talking about the fees. That's where a lot of these companies make a lot of their money, right?
Right. So if you look at their profitability, and so they may try to prevent it from slow it down. But we've seen that throughout our history, right? Sure. The buggy whip manufacturers didn't want the autos coming in, but innovation carries on. It's the great thing about America. Yeah. We're willing to try the new things, see it come in, but we have to be aware of it. And our role is in the political function or the policy legislative function, where you just got to be aware of the forces that might come against you.
Well, talk a little bit more about the ecosystem, right? Like, we're here at FTI on purpose, right? Like, they are now advising their clients on how to think about the blockchain, all of these other applications, union workers building data centers for mining, right? Like, what are the kind of concentric circles that now kind of evolve from greater investment adoption and domestic kind of strengthening of blockchain support?
So one of the things that I've heard about is that now a lot of the financial planning groups are recommending to their investors, have a certain percentage in this blockchain area. And I've been thinking this would be a smart thing to do for a while. These dinners, we all get invited to come to a free dinner and we'll help you do planning for your retirement. Those people are trusted advisors and they spread the news. So I think what you're going to see is kind of the opinion class in the country is going to learn more about this and decide to embrace it slowly. We have a conference every year with our major donors. 2 years ago, I invited Anthony Pompilano, who does a lot of work on this, particularly in Bitcoin. He and a panel with folks from Rivet and some folks in Miami that were real engaged in this. And they were describing to our members they're successful businessmen and women, and they got a lot of pushback. Like, isn't this just fraud? But as they explained it to them afterwards, they all came up to me and said, "Hey, I learned more there, David, than all the rest of the things you do." And then this year we had a couple similar panels, and it was the feedback and the reaction was much more positive and embracing. So my sense is out in the world, in the U.S., you're going to see a lot more people embrace it.
That's interesting.
I think there is we've never talked about this, but there may be some disagreement. There are programs in like the Department of Commerce around manufacturing, like the Manufacturing Extension Program. So this is a program that will help small, mid-sized manufacturers who don't have the wherewithal to go hire a big consulting firm to say, how can I do this better? You can actually have a government program that will help the manufacturer figure this out, and at a very, very low fee. Good for business because it generates more productivity and all the rest. I think something along those lines with blockchain, because you go to small town Ohio somewhere, they have no clue what blockchain is, right? And no clue what the benefits would be, but they're not dumb people. They would hear this and they would say, "Sure, wow, how do I do this? Like, what's going on here?" And even in the ag, our ag extensions, there may be an opportunity there in the agricultural industry. Who knows?
Yeah, totally.
But the key is, how do you get it out there, and then it'll go once it gets going, because people talk to each other.
Sure.
You're having coffee with your small business at the chamber, the Kiwanis Club. Hey, I'm doing this, blah blah blah, and next thing you know, it starts to spread. That's good for everybody.
Yeah, and I imagine that the kind of acceleration on the Bitcoin side maybe helps with some of the trust issues from the Sam Bankman-Fried time, right? I mean, talk about trust, right? Sure. Like, it's part education, it's part trust, right? I mean, so this seems like two really hard conversations to be having at the same time. Like, you have to educate people and then tell them why they should trust it, even though the headlines for the last couple of years weren't.
Does he know we have trust issues? Is that what he's trying to tell us?
I think so. Okay. Be careful.
Not here, Ken.
Not here.
Okay. But the politics today, though, it's generally there's lack of trust.
In government, in
culture,
politicians, and in each other. I think first comes education, or at least it has to be part
Sure.
of it, because what I hear is, I don't understand it, and so I don't trust it, right?
Yeah.
And I see this guy who created this Ponzi scheme, and,
Yeah.
and I don't, I told you, David, then you can't do it.
I told you.
Yeah. And so the more they have to go hand in hand. And I think you're correct, Ken. The ETF will be out there in the marketplace. People will see that that's successful. The volatility will still be there somewhat, but more manageable, or recognizable at least. So trust will build up. Well, it's like trust between people.
Yeah.
You get to know each other, and you
Have some coffee.
have some coffee, show up together on a podcast, and then pretty soon I know Tim's going to have this interest, and he'll protect my back on other things, and that type of interpersonal trust then also becomes like a financial trust. Okay, I can have some prediction where this will go.
Sure. Interesting.
Yeah, and I think you see like Coinbase had a great quarterly profit.
Sure.
And so it's like people saying, well, it's not working. Like, well, now,
Yeah.
okay, you rode out the bad times and things are starting to take off
Yeah.
now. But that, again, going back to the internet, that was a lot of companies came and went that aren't around anymore.
Yeah.
And it just weeds itself out. That's the market.
Well, at this moment of innovation, right, we're having a lot of conversations about the blockchain, but there's also a lot of conversations about AI and artificial intelligence.
Yeah.
How do you think the kind of focus on AI and all of this innovation goes hand in hand with the conversation on blockchain, and how can AI kind of be a catalyst for blockchain or help in your conversations on the Hill and around the country?
Yeah. And you have that same sort of trust issue there with AI, although I've seen that be embraced. You can just tell out in the industry, everybody advertises, we've got AI, right?
Yeah.
And so they've overcome that in some ways. I think they go hand in hand, right? They're both innovative uses of the digital economy.
Yeah.
And I think smart people will figure out how to apply AI and what they're developing in blockchain. And again, we don't want the government to come in with a heavy hand and say, we've got to stop this or regulate it. This came up with some folks who were hearing in their campaigns about some anonymous group going to create like a pornographic ad that they're in, and how do I protect myself against that? And it's just imagine that. When I was there, you didn't have to screen every word you said because somebody has an iPhone taping you. So growing up was a little bit easier. You could be wild as a teenager and not have to have somebody have a film of it. But now you've got people making up films about you. I think we're going to have to think through, as we do with all new technology, who has the responsibility or the best position to police that. And it may be the carriers, right? They may be able to detect if there's a fake AI and block it. And so there are going to be questions like that come up in the policy section. New technology, new problems, and new social norms.
Sure.
How do we adjust for that?
Yeah, I mean, it's such a powerful technology. I'm dating myself a little bit now with David, but like Billy Joel had a new song come out, right? Yeah. And I don't know if you see the video. So his music video is him from the 70s, Pompadour and the whole hair and the cigarettes there. But he's singing his new song because he hasn't written the song in 30 years. So they have Billy Joel in the 70s, 80s, 90s, 2000s singing his song from 3 weeks ago, whenever it was released. That's really cool. Yeah. So that's one like artistic application of how cool this could be, but it just shows you the scope of how cool the technology could be. And I think again, it's like some regulation, making sure everybody's protected, and it may be AI policing AI. Who knows? Sure. I mean, who knows how that's gonna work? But the opportunities there, I mean, are off the charts for marketing, design, better understanding. But let me just put a plug in here for like these are really complicated issues. Like this is like serious stuff, big issues with huge implications for our culture, our economy, our safety, all the rest. Which is why you have to have mature people
Mhm.
in positions of power that can have conversations with each other, and whatever, you go out to the microphone, you beat each other up and whatever, but you better get behind the scenes and Tip O'Neill and Ronald Reagan and have a beer and figure it out, because everyone else is kind of relying on it, and to have what's happening here, not kind of addressing it the way it needs to be addressed is a real problem.
Sure.
And so, man, it's part of why we enjoy working together, is to just set a little bit of an example of you don't have to hate each other.
Yeah. Show it's okay.
Yeah, it's okay. It's okay.
Excellent. So my last question, before I turn it over, I want Jeremy to say a few words, is around education and the talent gap, right? Like everything is moving so quickly, right? So as you think about the focus on Washington, the innovation is homegrown, right? Like we want to have the right talent, add to the ecosystem, add to the innovation, ensure it's kind of built and kind of grown within the United States, obviously for financial reasons, for economic, for security, et cetera. How do you think, are you thinking a little bit about that? Is there kind of things you have seen out there on the educational side, the talent side? And is that part of the narrative yet?
It should be very much, Ken. Couple things that I've seen. One of our candidates actually was a recent law school grad and told me, David, I studied crypto law.
Wow.
And I'm thinking, boy, when I was in law school, we didn't have that class. So I think it's happening out there, kind of under the radar screen as the educational system looks at it. I don't know an example, but I'll bet MIT, Purdue with its computer science group, all of these colleges that specialize in that. I'll bet you anything they're going to develop courses on that.
I mean, Indiana guy, MIT and Purdue, he puts them right at this, and Bowling Green State University in Ohio too, with Harvard. Well, Ohio State has a certification program in their business school now. So, I mean, people are starting to recognize that this is something that's moving. But again, I think even talking K through 12, again, reform and, we got rid of shop class in most places. Like the modern day shop class would be understanding things like this, these two, massive technologies that are coming. And so, we jump all in with like the college and college loan forgiveness and that kind of thing. And that whole system is a mess, but we have to have a focus on skills. And I think there's a lot of people that won't need to go to college to do AI, won't need to go to college to understand and have a very successful life dealing in the blockchain ecosystem.
But I imagine part of the grassroots, if the talent is kind of looking for the jobs and then top down.
And the great thing about young people is they're always looking for what's coming up next. Right. And hey, this is cool. I want to be part of that.
Well, David McIntosh, Tim Ryan, thank you so much for joining us on Coffee with Ken. I want to invite Jeremy Sheridan from FTI up to say a few words.
Thank you all for being here on behalf of FTI Consulting's Blockchain and Digital Asset Group. We really appreciate your attendance. Coffee with Ken, former Congressman, thank you both for your insights. And as much as your insights, your leadership. This is a vitally important conversation, and coming from someone, gentleman such as yourself, it really helps move this forward.
Thank you.
FTI Consulting, we talked a lot today about the what and the why. At FTI Consulting, we're the who, the how, and the when. We stand ready to partner with all of you proactively with our blockchain as a service offerings, our abilities to build in the NFT and metaverse space to provide regulatory and consulting advisory work in order to do this safely, do this the right way, and do this within compliant structures. Also retroactively, where I come in the investigative space to identify assets, track, trace, assign valuation or attribution, but also to provide financial advisory to distressed companies in bankruptcy and restructuring. So we are looking forward to partnering with all of you. Thank you all again for your leadership and insights on this.
Well, appreciate it, Jeremy, and thank you all for tuning in. You can always visit coffeewithken.com to catch up on this episode, past sessions, and catch up on future ones. Until next time. Thanks, folks.
Thank you.